So, John, it's the end of 2024 and the start of 2025. And what I want to know from you is, have the robots won?
Hmm. I don't think so. I don't think so.
Phew.
I think the humans are still in the driver's seat. Yeah.
Excellent. And are they going to win in 2025? I want some
I don't
predictions
think
from you,
so.
John.
Yeah. I I guess maybe you got to be more specific about which humans, right? I think if you put it at the level of all humanity, humans are definitely winning compared to the robots. There's lots of interesting things happening when you get more specific about which humans that we're talking about.
Yeah. So, the purpose of this conversation is really to do a little bit of a review of where AI in music or AI music is at the end of 2024 and what you, John, think might happen in 2025. And obviously, in this situation, I'm the idiot. Well, in fact, in most situations, I'm the idiot. But in this situation, I'm the idiot in that I don't really keep up with what's going on specifically. So I'm the non-expert, whereas John is up to his arms in robots, so to speak. So on a daily basis. So yeah. So if you were to say, like, how would you? This is probably going to be an almost impossible question to answer, but if you were to describe what happened, an overview of what happened in 2024 in relation to AI in music or AI music, however you want to put it, what would you say?
Yeah. Um, I think one thing, if I look back, is some of the some of the sort of like exciting features, like more interesting features of what AI does in music have become more mainstream. People are actually using them, like um, many musicians, not just like a small group who are really interested in tech. Um, so this is, and maybe not all of this was in 2024, but I think become it's grown a lot faster in the past year. So, things like stem splitting, using AI voice changers or voice swappers. I'm actually starting to hear artists that I listen to already start to use this stuff. And so I have this like different perspective on the real world of, from my perspective as just like a music fan and listener, like what happens when artists that I already listen to get their hands on some of the AI music tools that kind of work
So
the
what does
best or
happen?
most
Let,
accessible.
let, let's start there. So,
Um,
so what is what are you noticing there?
um, well, I guess one kind of like anecdote just for me as a fan is so one of my favorite artists is this guy Caribou.
Oh yeah,
Um,
I love Caribou
yeah,
too.
he's been around for a long time. He made a new album that came out a few months ago, I think, and I believe he used like an AI voice changer to make his singing sound like a female voice, and to my ears, like a younger female voice. So it was like an album of kind of dance music. He's kind of an eclectic musician and does lots of different styles, but this was kind of a dancey album, and I felt like a lot of the songs were from someone else's perspective other than him. So he was kind of
Cool.
using the AI tool to like tell a story in a different way from someone else's perspective outside of himself. That's just my kind of interpretation of what he's doing. I'm not really sure. But, you know, this wasn't something that I found through like my work in tech or AI. This is just like an artist that I already listened to. And now the stuff is out there. And so I'm starting to hear it through like my just listener habits. And that's really new to me. That's interesting. And I think just experiencing it as kind of a music fan feels very different to like being, kind of the supposed expert about this stuff. Speculating about how other artists are going to use it, is very different to actually experiencing how artists that you like are using it, what they're doing with it. So I feel like this year is the first time that I experienced that. I guess other things that I noticed that I would reflect on are like a lot of kind of challenges with people using stuff. Turns out that AI is really hard to use. Not a surprise, but I think there's a reason why we hear like really specific uses of the technology, like the voice changing stuff or stem splitting. But I haven't had that same experience where with like an artist that I like and hearing them using something that's clearly AI in some other like more holistic way.
Can I just ask, when you say, I mean, I think I know what you mean, but let's just focus in on, you just said AI is hard to use, right? So that statement, and I'm sure that many people would agree with you. So could you just break down what it is that makes it hard to use?
Yeah. So I'm specifically thinking about doing like music production and trying to express something in a song, create a part of a song or a whole song that sort of like does something artistic, expresses your artistic vision. That's what I mean when I say it's hard to use. If you're trying to express something artistically, AI, a lot of the applications of AI tend to give you like these really broad strokes where you type in some words and it gives you this whole fully created thing, or and then you have to figure out how to squash that into your artistic vision or how to build something around this thing that you've just gotten from it.
So that's an interesting, yeah. So let me just, because I'm going to come at this as the music coach, the creative coach, and I think it was again, I don't exactly say it's a mistake, but because when you said AI is hard to use, there are certain assumptions about how you make music that would make AI hard to use. And it was encapsulated when you said, if you try and squash what the AI does into your artistic vision, your musical vision. Now, one of the things that I help people do, the overarching kind of principles that I help people do, because that's what I would call, I've named it, the design, small d, mindset, right? I have this fixed container, which I'm calling my musical vision. And everything needs to fit within that container. Okay. And that is absolutely an essential part of the creative process, an essential approach that we use in the creative process. I've got this thing, that fixed point I am moving towards. However, it's only half of the story, because the other half, and you know what I'm going to say, John, but the other half of it is what I call the discovery approach, which is my artistic vision, my musical vision isn't a fixed thing. It's not a fixed container that I squash anything into. Well, I tell you what, let's push the analogy into probably an inadvisable place. Let's stretch the analogy. So it's not a beaker or a cup or a bin, right? A solid bin. It's actually a sack made of material, right? And so I put various different things that I find and that appear into the sack, which is very flexible. Right? It can get bigger and it can get smaller. It can be all sorts of different shapes depending on what I put in it. So if you think of using AI in that way, well, then it's not difficult to use. It's easy to use, but you just have to use a different approach. It's more of a curation approach than a I have to, this is my musical vision. And if it doesn't sound like that, I've got to find another prompt right? Or another set of words so that it doesn't hallucinate its way into something else. Instead, a much more open, okay, let's start here and let's see what happens. Am I making sense? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the thing about bringing a bit of tech into that part, into that approach, is that like we already have a lot of things that work really well for that, right? Like we have samples, sample libraries, listening to other music. We already have like lots of tools for that. And so I think that it will take a while for people to figure out where like AI is different to those other tools and where it works, where they can get it to work well with the, artistic
Now
stack.
that's making me think of, well, we've already got horses. Why do we need cars? Like, does AI, in order for it to have value in the creative process, does it need to be able to do what a human can do? This is the question I have about all of does it need to be able to do what we can, like what a human does best? Or is it something that, I mean, it can be both. It doesn't have to be either or, of course. But actually, let me ask you a question instead. Why do you think, because I noticed this in LLMs, ChatGPT and things like that, with people talking about it, there seems to be this thing where not everyone, lots of people, most people maybe, are trying to get it to do something that humans already do. Right. And the way it's measured is how similar is it to what a human being can do or something. But we just need the AI to do it faster or something, or better, or more intelligently or something. Why is that?
Yeah.
What's the reason for that kind of frame around it? Is it because it's the most potentially the most profitable, or that human beings don't do it well enough? Or because the way I see AI is it's this thing that does this other thing that nothing else does like that.
I think there's a specific reason for why it's that way. It's because the only thing we know how to measure. The other thing that you're talking about, we have no way of measuring that quickly. We have to like spend a lot of time to get people to use it and then give us feedback, and that takes forever.
It's because of the engineers ruining everything.
Yes.
Oh, I see. Well, my dad's an engineer, by the way, so I'm only kidding. Yeah. So do you think that's one of the things that is the reason behind it? Is the people who are developing it have an engineering, and again, engineers have built the world, and so I've got nothing against engineers, but there's a specific way that engineers engineer. In order to engineer, you need to think in a certain way. Do you think that's part of the? If this is a problem,
I'm depending which hat I'm wearing, I'm one of those engineers. So I can kind of speak from that perspective. Like, yeah, if it's way easier to do engineering if you have like a number that you are trying to reach, and you can twiddle your knobs, and if things get closer to that number, then you know that you're on the right track. And if you don't have that number, then you're just kind of like uncertain and groping for things.
You don't know you're on the right track. You know you're on a track that you can measure, which is fundamentally different.
You're on the right track to the thing that you've assumed from the beginning,
which is something that you can measure. So in other words, because like you should think about the stages. Okay, in order to know if what I'm doing is good, I need to be able to measure it scientifically. let's say, right? So therefore, that then becomes the right track, even though it might not be the right track. It's the measurable track, which then becomes the right track because it's the one that you can measure. So it's like a loop.
Yeah, exactly. It's sort of self-fulfilling prophecy,
Yeah.
feedback loop
Okay.
type of
So
thing.
anyway, I I think I understand now why there's that focus. That makes a lot of sense to me. So are there just interested to know at this stage, are there people who are making noises like I'm making at this point? There must be.
Um,
Like, why are we doing
yeah.
it this way? Why are we taking this approach? Is that a conversation that's going on?
Um, yeah, there's lots of different like pushback against the sort of dominant ways of doing AI. I think, and I'm kind of with you. If I had to pick a side, I would say that I don't love the way that the mainstream way of handling AI development and like the paths that are getting the most money at. I'm 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 not confident that those are the right ones. But yeah, it's just hard to. There's a lot of different ways that you might try things, but it's all really open ended and difficult. So it just takes. I think there'll be lots of little different projects that people do, little research projects to you know explore some way or another, which is what research is all about.
I mean, so I guess we need to make a distinction between I don't know, do we need to make a distinction between research for its own sake and research which has a future profitable product focus?
Um,
Is that a an important or useful kind of distinction between what's going on in AI? So there are people who are doing the research to find, again, for its own sake, and then those who want to make products for people to buy and use.
I think I think everyone is to some. I mean, yes, I agree. I think there is that distinction that exists, but I think as you're talking, the one that I think is more relevant to your questions is that I think everyone kind of agrees that like products are important, and um, most people don't want to work on something that's never going to be useful to anyone, um, aside from sort of like a theoretical idea. Even if you're doing mostly theoretical ideas, I think most people are motivated by the real world and making something useful. I think it's more about the definition of what is useful.
Yes.
So this is where we've had sort of debates about products like Suno before, where it's like, is it more useful to put all your energy towards making something to make like really wild and crazy sounds that will be like fun to play with for musicians in their studio? Or is it more useful to, get really good at creating high quality generic genre tracks? I think clearly the high quality generic tracks are the more profitable in the short term. But yeah, like I think there's definitely products that you could make and sell that are closer to the wild sound, creative sounds direction.
Yeah, I mean, so I want to make another distinction. Sorry for constantly making distinctions. So, so it's just the way my brain seems to be on today. It's early on Friday morning, so I don't think the type of focus that I personally would like, whether it happens or not, no one cares what I would like. But if the type of focus I would like is to use a tool, is to have a tool which is which helps me to see things in a different way, or gives me a different view of what I'm doing, takes me out of myself. It inspires me sometimes, surprises me other times, but none of that needs to be crazy or wild. Like, actually, what it does needs to be crazy or wild. It's more about the perspective shifts and the reinterpretation in my mind of what I'm doing. It kind of, because when you're in the and the reason people have producers and things is when you're in the process as a solo music maker, you're so in it that it's that valuable third person perspective that we miss. And that's one of the reasons I do what I do and do the programs that I do, is that we're constantly zooming out and kind of trying to be the producer of the music that we're making, even though we're just one person. And what I've found in the limited experiments I've done with AI, is that it, in a different way, functions like that. Whether it does something crazy or it does something totally not crazy, it's and actually that's how I use ChatGPT all the time as well. It is when I want a different perspective. It's not to find out the truth or the right way or the measurably better way or anything like that. It's like, okay, I know I'm stuck in my own head right now and I'm going around in circles with this just thought loop. I need a different perspective. And if I haven't got a human being available, there's a little gray box available, which I can type in or now speak into, and it gives me this different perspective. And the actual output is almost, well, it's not irrelevant. Of course it's not irrelevant. It doesn't matter whether the output is wild or boring, as long as it's a different perspective. It causes me to think differently about what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a very good point. I agree with you that is what happens a lot of the time when we use AI. And I think, how about like every time one of us like talks, we just say, I'm going to make a distinction, and that'll
Yeah, that's
be
just
the theme of the podcast. So let me make a distinction.
Well, the reason for that, I think, is that the way that you one of the main ways you create knowledge is by noticing the contradictions and the distinctions in what the other person or in what you yourself has said. That's where the actual learning happens. Is okay, so that doesn't quite work in this case, and so let's make a distinction there. So that's why we're doing it. So
so there's a couple ways two different things, I guess, that come to mind when that you could kind of separate. Like there is that sort of overarching feeling of like this other non-human thing reflecting what you're doing back at you, that is kind of a feature, whether we want it or not, of a lot of AI stuff. And then there's the kind of specifics of like what it's doing. Is it generating something? Is it analyzing something? Like what is it doing? And I think those interact. Like I think that when I was making the distinction between the generic music versus the wild and crazy thing, I'm kind of making the argument underneath that the wild and crazy stuff gives you a more interesting perspective on what you're already doing, because it amplifies the sort of unique qualities of what you're doing and makes you notice things that you're doing. I'm sure you can find many counter arguments to that as well.
I think I have a problem.
Yeah.
That definitely gave me a different perspective. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about, go back to the previous episode of the AI Music Podcast where I put in some lyrics of mine. So yeah, so that is the counterexample, but I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I totally agree. And I've kind of like finished up recently or just finishing up this project that I've been doing at work with people who work in art museums, like introducing them to AI, and I have like a team that's building a little sort of prototype app for intended to be used by people who work in museums and places like that. People who are sort of making decisions about how to present artwork or write about it. So you're like looking at a lot of times just language around the way we're describing something. And after watching like so many people, basically the activity that people are doing is, so like we run these workshops with a bunch of museum curators and stuff. And the activities are for them to train an AI, sort of like prompting, but with sort of some structure around it, so that you're not just dealing with an empty text box, but to train an AI to analyze an artwork in some way, or to sort of define some narrow concept and recognize it. So you could look through a whole database and find, oh, these are all the people that are writing in this way. Like these artists, they all write about their biographies. Whereas with these other artists, they write about the sort of formal qualities of the actual artwork. Why is that? This kind of thing. And so my point is, after watching like so many people try to do this and struggling, working through it, these are people who don't have AI experience, but they have lots of experience with the sort of subject matter of what they're doing. I sort of like realized that, and I was kind of embarrassed for a while to like use this analogy, but eventually I embraced that it was like the best one I could think of, was that this exercise in like having AI sort of analyze or critique something where you're trying to teach it your sort of analysis, is it was like this thing we did one day in my 5th grade class, where we had to write instructions for how to make a peanut butter sandwich, and my teacher would
yes, I know, yeah.
Yeah,
Literally
that's the American version. I think the British version is to make a cup of tea, right? And it would like your teacher just makes a mistake, anytime you're not like specific enough, so like my teacher would, like you say, stick the knife into the jar, but you didn't write open the jar. So he just like pokes the closed jar with the knife. Yeah. And it goes wrong. And so like, and then you get more specific, and it's this sort of endless thing where you're trying to explain exactly how to do something, and someone is demonstrating to you all the ways that it could be misinterpreted. Like that's the kind of like, AI is like pretty good at doing that in almost in so many different situations, and that's kind of useful. That's kind of cool. It's like an exercise that I never repeated because it takes another person to like play that character, but AI will happily play that character. Be like, sure, I'll sing about hobgoblins in like a really poppy way, like no problem. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, I think, coming back to the assumptions of the people who are developing it, and maybe not the assumptions exactly, but the frame that they use. I mean, if you're used to I mean, I don't know, because I don't write code, but if you're used to debugging code, then in a sense, the AI doing these weird things is a bug that needs to be fixed. And I think one of the things that I have wondered is, because to me, the AI hallucinating or doing weird things that aren't right but are interesting, I fear that it will become a thing of the past, and it's a missed opportunity.
Why do you fear that?
Because of engineers. No, because of the people who are making it. Because if the people, again, I don't want to say because of the people, because if the people are making assumptions and coming up with theories now, right? Because if the people who are making it need there to be a 1 or a 0. 1 is we have succeeded to do the thing that we have determined is measurable and therefore right. And 0 is no, it's not doing the thing that we have determined is measurable and therefore is right. Then these wonderful, weird, sometimes unusual, different perspectives will gradually be trained, or however you want to put it, coded out of our AI. And I mean, is that even possible? Or
that's sort of why I asked why you're afraid of it, because I feel like I'm not sure that's possible. I feel like it's too hard. Yeah, it's just like the nature
so the
of it.
robots will win. Okay, brilliant.
Yeah, I guess that's true. In that way, the robots are winning. Like
I
they're
don't
always going to
want
win.
the AI to be more like a human in every way, apart from it's faster and knows more, right? I mean, one of the problems, for example, I have with ChatGPT is it's very vanilla. It's no longer available, but there is this Pi. That was it. Pi. It was the guy who wrote Mustafa Suleiman, the guy who wrote The Coming Wave. He had a startup called, I can't remember what the startup was called, but they had an AI called Pi, who was incredibly characterful, and I mean, kind of annoying in some ways, but that had a very specific character, and I enjoyed. I know it's not a person, right? But I enjoyed speaking to that thing, right? To that computer program. Right? I enjoyed.
Yeah.
I actually got a lot of joy from our interactions. It was the first time I've spoken to a computer where it didn't feel like I was speaking to a computer, whereas speaking to ChatGPT feels like you're speaking to a computer. There's no, it's like, this is an LLM. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just very like,
yeah.
And that is something that, I mean, I'm just probably being naive or something, but that is something that I wonder in the kind of push forward to making useful products in a measurably useful way, rather than the more kind of gray area of discovery and sort of more it's more of a kind of brainstorming or dreaming way or something. Is something I worry about. I mean, okay, so let's come on to sort of more practical matters, and I kind of don't want to talk about this, but I feel that we have to in order to have this conversation, because just from my personal experience, one of the things that has kind of held me back, apart from those initial experiments with using tools like Suno and what was the other one, Udio, is I don't know, I haven't taken the time to look into it, so but it's just stopped me from using them in any way, is the thought that they have been trained, and again, this is a gray area as well in terms of kind of fair use and all that kind of stuff, so I don't really want to go down the rabbit hole on that, because I don't have an opinion. I don't know enough about it to have an opinion, but I have heard rumblings that there has been some kind of, and I'm sure, if you're not qualified to say or anything, that's fine too, but about the data that has been used and whether that is okay or not. Because I certainly don't want to use a tool that it has been unethically created off the back of other musicians' work. So where are we with all of that? And again, I'm coming at this completely neutrally without knowing anything.
Yeah. I think it's one of the big questions that people been wrestling with as they start to get more familiar with this stuff. And I don't have information on what any like particular company is doing, but if I'm speculating, I think it's quite likely that there are companies who are training on material that on anything and everything they can get their hands on,
that they don't have permission to use.
Yeah, they don't have permission to use. And it's sort of like because large machine learning models are a relatively new thing, there's sort of a rush to catch up with regulation, but people don't. Um, Different countries are starting to like move forward with things, but it's going to take a while to reach sort of an equilibrium where it's clear like what you're allowed to do and what you're not. And in this, in, while things are still in that gray area before like it becomes before there are regulations that get like really solidified, um, there are opportunists who are just like, well, no, it's not illegal now, so I'm going to do everything that I can, and I think that's happening with some companies, but there are a lot of other companies, in tech who from the start are kind of like uncomfortable ethically with training on stuff they don't have permission to do. And yeah, like you said, they're worried about sort of like profiting off the backs of artists without their permission or compensation. So there's a lot of people who are not doing that. And there's plenty of ways to use this tech without doing that. There's some things that become harder to do or take more time if you're not going to just, download everything and use everything.
So do you have an opinion on the argument from some quarters that because the AI is generating something based upon something it's been trained upon, therefore it's fair use? Because if this is true, and I'm not stating this as someone who believes this or doesn't believe it, I'm just stating the case as I understand it. So it's similar to saying, well, if I, Mike Monday, make any piece of music in a genre, or in fact any piece of music full stop, because obviously everything that is created is on the shoulders of giants, right? Everything that's created has come from somewhere else. We're not an island. Yeah, and so therefore you'd have to use the same rules for a human being. So because it's generating something new, that means that you don't need to get the permission of artists who have created the music. So I mean, maybe that argument had been had and won. I don't know. As I said, I'm not an expert here. So where are you, or where is the kind of conversation in terms of that idea?
I'm not completely up to date, but I think there's a lot of lawyers who are jumping at the bit to shoot down that argument that you just summarized. There's a lot of lawyers. There's a lot of lawsuits that are already out there. People demonstrating that, just showing lots of anecdotes, examples of something that's been very closely copied. And even though it's generated something new, it's actually made something that's very close to a copy of something else. Is recognizable. You can recognize somebody's voice or a particular song or something like that. So I don't think that argument is going to be ultimately going to be enough to just sort of like make everything fair use. I don't know. There's a lot of lobbyists out there, so who am I to say what's going to happen? But in terms of what I personally think, yeah, I mean, this is like the data is the raw material for training machine learning, and so it's one of the most important parts of the process. And I think people would love it to just be free. Engineers, tech people would love if it was just free and you didn't have to worry about it. But that's not the world we live in. It's not just free and you don't have to worry about it. And there's different ways of handling that reality. Some people can just kind of ignore it and like have to deal with getting sued, and dealing with lawsuits, and others can kind of like take a more careful approach where, you're not going to get sued and you don't have to deal with getting sued later. So Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think there's
in a sense, I guess the question, because that if you just take the argument I summarized on its own, and I'm just having these thoughts now, I think there is a sense in which if you just take that on its own, it's true. Because I mean, people all the time, human beings all the time will, import a track into their DAW and they will basically copy it and then they'll change a few things about it. And I'm not saying this is right, but this is what a lot of people do. In fact, some people teach that this is what you do in order to make music. I absolutely stand against that 100%. But so you copy it, you copy almost everything, and then you just change enough about it so that it's supposedly your own. Okay. And obviously there are different
sure.
gradations of that, all the way up to complete plagiarism. So, if that's okay, if you can't be taken to court for that, and I presume you can in some cases, then I can't see if that is, I'm not saying that it is or isn't, but if that is okay, or if people don't get taken to court for doing that, then in that specific case, I can't see that there is a problem with the output of the AI. But what you're saying is that that's not the only part we need to look at. Because in order for this AI to do anything, it needs input. It needs raw material in order for it to become valuable. Therefore, which is a different thing that we're talking about. So in order
Yeah.
for the value to be created, there needs to be value taken from somewhere else, and that value isn't being compensated. Is that a good way of looking at it?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's tricky because there comes it depends what you're doing with it. If you're, I think there comes a point where if what you're doing is so high level and you're just kind of like looking at, you know, counting things about how many songs are in one genre or another, right? Like you could take the most basic thing and you could convince me that like I shouldn't have to pay every artist because I looked at a database that said what genre their track is, right? Like that should be free. I would make that argument now, like, and that's on one side, but it, with when you're training machine learning, you're looking much more specifically at the features of that audio file, not just at like, what is the genre of it. So it depends what you're looking at and what you're doing with it. And so it's messy, it's complicated. But the other point to add to your comparison, which I think is important for people to think about it, is that there's also the issue of scale, right? Like if you're going to rip off other people's songs, like fine. But what if you rip off, I mean, how many songs can you rip off in a day? Like not that many, right? You're just one person, but if you automate it and you can rip off everyone's songs and create a business that's like selling those songs all over the place and like, making profits from it to the point that those people are losing their jobs. Well, that's a much bigger deal, right? Than just someone doing it by hand, right? So there's the scale of things is what's new about AI, and I think that's where this analogy where just I don't think that it fits to make this comparison between, well, people are just copying too, and yeah, one way in which it like really doesn't fit is the scale issue, right?
Well,
Where
yeah. So this is something that I've been thinking about a lot, and that's again, and we're getting onto the philosophy of law now. And I'm not qualified to talk about that, but it's something that's been striking me a fair amount, and with various different things going on in the world. Sometimes I think people assume that the law must be, is the same as what's fair, right? That's not actually true. It's unpleasant to think about, but it's not actually true. right? The laws
Yeah,
are, you want to be treated, of course, you want to be treated fairly by the legal system. Absolutely. I'm not questioning that. But the laws in and of themselves aren't necessarily fair, right? And I'm not sure
for
that
sure.
directly relates to what you're talking about. But there was something about what you're saying, and I've not thought it through, so I'm not going to say anything about it. There was something there where I was like, yeah, I totally get that, but I'm not sure if that's a legal thing, because I think maybe not fair is the wrong word. There's what's ethical, and then there's what's legal. And I think people often
Yeah,
think that they have to be the same thing. The thing is, there are a lot of things which are within the law, but which I would never do, which are unethical.
yeah,
I
for
can't sleep
sure.
at night if I do them. And that's
Yeah,
so that line is maybe kind of what we're talking about here.
yeah, for sure. I think there's only there's a huge space of things that are unethical, and many of those are not covered by laws at all. Yeah, there's such a small overlap. There are two whole different worlds between what's ethical and what's legal.
Mm.
Um, but I think that like nobody's going to make a law. They're just not going to bother to make laws for things unless they affect a lot of people or certain people who have power. Some also, but like someone could make a law against copying music the way you just described. If you know, if you created an empire, you figured out how to build a corporation with thousands of people who were just doing this all day, and you were outsourcing all over the world, ripping off artists. Someone would probably notice and figure out how to pass a law to make that illegal.
Mm.
And lawyers, yeah, also not a lawyer, but lawyers and policymakers figure out how to do this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I guess then there becomes the question: is do you regulate before it happens, or do you regulate when it happens? Right? Because the thing is, and again, I'm not taking a position. The only position I'm taking is almost in response to what you're saying. So I don't actually know what I think. Because we're in very kind of dangerous waters here. So we're just having a conversation. So but so I'm just kind of thinking something through. Because there is a sense in which if you regulate something that hasn't happened yet, but which could theoretically happen, you may well be unwittingly stopping something else from happening that could well solve the problem. So or solve other problems which we really want to solve. I can't think of one right now in this case, of course, because I've not thought it through. But one of the things that I teach and sort of talk about in relation to literally making music, making your own music, is that every solution that you apply to a piece of music creates another problem. You literally cannot create a solution without
yeah,
creating a problem. And what we're talking about here is if you are you're stopping certain solutions. So let's say it could be a good solution or a bad solution, doesn't matter. But a solution is how to make loads and loads of music for virtually no money and no time of a certain quality within a certain genre. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing doesn't matter. It is a solution to a problem. Okay? So just taking the judgment out of it, it's a solution to a problem. Now, that solution creates a million and one other problems. But without actually being in that position, we don't know the other things that it might bring. So by not allowing that solution to exist, we don't know what we're doing because we haven't got to that state of having created the other problems.
yeah, yeah. I know what you mean. I can think of yeah. I'm also out of my depth if we're talking about actual real world policy making, but
No, yeah.
I do I do have some a little bit of insight from being a teacher at a university. So like we have to decide, for example, like what is cheating, right? So in this case, you're kind of like in this is an administrative sort of like policy decision. Like when you're running a class, you have to and you have to give people marks. Like you become a policymaker. And so with like ChatGPT to keep it AI focused, there's been a lot of like confusion and hand wringing about like, well, should it be allowed? Should it not be allowed? Because like, should we make it cheating if people use ChatGPT to write their term papers? Um, because if you let them do it, then suddenly the ways that you had of evaluating students like kind of fall apart depending how your class is set up. Um, but if you don't allow it, then what actually like one of the other problems that comes up is that you are preventing students who for whom English is, if this is an English speaking class, students for whom English is a second language, you're kind of being unfair to them because they're the ones who really benefit from this sort of like writing assistance, whereas the native speakers, they don't need it as much. And so if you make it cheating, well, like the people whose English is not that great are going to be much more tempted to use it, and they're going to be much more likely to get like penalized for cheating. So like that's a problem. And I think most classes where I teach will kind of allow it. You just have to declare that you used it and what you used it for, and you have to get specific. So like, I think that this is a small example that it usually plays out in some sort of fashion this way, where like the like very binary initial decision just isn't that simple. And the like ultimate solution usually ends up being something like that requires a little bit more nuance about what you're doing with it. And I think that's going to be the case for all this stuff about, you know, whether it's ethical or whether it's legal to, you know, use
Yeah, I mean, you know,
somebody's
a
music.
great example is, I don't know if it's a great example. An example is, you know, are cars a good thing? Or are they a bad thing? How many people have died in car crashes who wouldn't have died had there not been cars? But then on the other side, what have cars allowed us to do and create and all the other stuff? So, I mean, again, I'm not taking a position there, but that's something that at this point, when we have a new technology, it is important to ask those questions and not just immediately jump to either side. I'm talking about either side here. I'm not taking a side. So either saying, no, let's just push forward. We'll figure it out, which I'm like, I'm not sure about that. But on the other side, no, we need to stop this now because just think of all of the terrible things that are going to happen. It's like, but we have to hold both of those truths in our heads at the same time, which is what's so difficult.
Yeah. And for the most part, I don't have like super strong opinions on these things. I have opinions, but I'm not like shaking my fist about like, you know, one of the really common disagreements. But I do think that like those, so, okay, like the way you've just painted it, I think is like a really nice summary for what like a lot of people kind of think of when they first see, you know, the progress in AI, like, and what it can do and how it's powerful. It's like, oh my God, like we can't let this happen, or, oh my God, this is inevitable. And like neither of those things is what I think people should be thinking about. No. It's like be impressed, but also the very specific way that it's been done so far does not have to be that very specific way. Like, what if we took the billions of dollars that are spent on doing AI and spent that same amount of money and effort and stuff, but did it in a really different way? That is also a world that could exist. You know, what if instead of to make a music analogy, what if instead of spending, thousands and thousands of computers and GPUs to train like Suno. What if Suno trained on just Mike Monday? Um,
Well, then the robots really would take over the world. It would be like
so,
Terminator. It would be like everyone's worst nightmare. That's the future nobody wants to hear or see. I guarantee you that. So, okay, brilliant. So, to finish up, John, let's kind of try and bring this back to sort of a practical thing, a practical place for people who are actually making music. So, how are you in your own music going to use AI in 2025, and what what approach are you kind of thinking of taking? And if you want to give a sort of prediction of where you think we might sort of be this time next year, that would be great too.
yeah. Um, so in terms of what I'm doing, um, I kind of I have a few different ideas that I would like to try. Most most of them have to do around using AI to find ways of being like more unique and more different. I think that's kind of the any way that I use AI, I feel like that's always something that I want to be involved in it because it's always going to take some time. So I don't have that much time to try like a million different AI things. They all take kind of a bunch of effort, and so I would want it to be like quite customized, So have using things that are like adaptable, where you can sort of upload your own audio and have it do something that's really unique to like the audio that you provide, you know, using your own voice or your own instrument, your own data set, for example, having something where you train it yourself or like maybe it's been trained, but you adapt it using like your own sounds. Um, so that's kind of like broadly the type of thing that I would look for. I would go if I see sort of like a new plugin or something come out. If it has that capability, that's the one I would try first, rather than the one that's where everyone gets kind of the same thing. And I think that also ties in with your question about the prediction thing. I think one thing that I've started to see and that I think is really going to grow is seeing in music, particularly like sort of these customized models or plugins where like something has been trained on a specific artist, so you get this sort of like virtual um virtual artist, for lack of a better word, where you're like jamming with some artist, that's partnered with a company where they've made something specific to that artist's sound and it um so I think we're going to see a lot more of that. I think that's like musicians are going to be curious about that, what that is going to be like, what that experience is like. Um, it remains to be seen, like whether that will be really engaging or how similar it would be to actually interacting with that human who's like being part of the an AI product. Um, but yeah, I think making things like small, easy to use, easy to train, and easy to customize is where I see things going in the next year. And for me personally, like that's also where my interest is. And as sort of like from my artist side, when I think about what makes my sort of unique style and having this like my sort of like tech and AI background is plays into that at least a little bit. Yeah, I think just being like a little bit on the edge of what's out there is kind of what's interesting to me to do in AI. So, you know, using it to get a sound that, and I've been saying this since we first started talking, using it to get a sound that no one else is going to get, or that I couldn't get any other way. And so that might mean like using it kind of at the very end of a track where like I've written the whole track. It's kind of done, but maybe I need a transition. And so I'm going to can I find an AI that will do some familiar gesture, but in a different way? Like another way to describe that's more general is I would use it to look for happy accidents.
Yeah.
That's sort of, that's exciting about it. It's like, it's that feature that you were talking about, it's going to get it wrong. It's going to make stuff up. But if I can figure out the sort of conditions where the way that it gets it wrong works to my benefit, then that's really interesting to me.
Awesome. Well, discovery away. That's what you just described there is kind of the essence of discovery in a way. It's making happy accidents into what I think they really are. I don't think they're happy accidents exactly. That kind of demotes them in my mind. It's literally half of the creative process is the finding of things that you didn't intend or expect, but which are wonderful. So I can't think of a better way to finish this conversation. Thank you so much, John. Here's to a great new year and wonderful 2025.
Cheers. Thanks, Mike.